Three,
All right.
3, 2, 1. Hello, hello.
Hello, and welcome everybody to the Quantum Biology Wellness Summit. I am extremely honored to be joined today by Dan Winters. He is an incredibly remarkable person. He is the inventor of the Therify, the imploder water technology. He has an extensive background from IBM. He's done work with MIT. I mean, we could go on and on about his extensive background, but I think it would be better if we talk about his extensive knowledge. So welcome, Dan. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you. I like your smile and I like the earnestness of your website and your project to help people be self-empowered and healed. And yes, my little piece of that puzzle has been, background psychophysiology and biofeedback. So sort of the electrical engineering of spiritual healing. That's my shtick, as it were. And most people know. So fractalfield.com, fractalu.com, and we have, 3 million viewers on YouTube, and it's fun. But we're happy to meet new friends, and I like your smile.
Well, thank you so much. And I was really introduced to you through heart coherence.
All right.
Yeah, exactly. And then what a fractal field that was, right? Just down the rabbit hole into all your work. It's just absolutely incredible. And I just want to remind people that we have a presenter page for Dan that you can find all of his links, all of his work, all of that there in one place. So you too can go down the rabbit hole. But I'd love to maybe start just at the basics for someone uh, who isn't familiar with your work, who hasn't gone down the rabbit hole. Can you tell us just a little bit about just really basic through this concept of ether and this toroidal flow of implosion and compression? I know that a basic overview is sort of hard to do, but
No, that's important. We have to reach the beginners. That's where we start here, and we need to get down to the basics. Absolutely. As you know, so my background, psychophysiology, University of Detroit, I was a polygraph builder. And so we were measuring whether university kids liked Playboy magazine and looked how fast the GSR responded. So I learned very early on about the electrical nature of emotion. But what does that have to do? And that has everything to do with the nature of the ether and how we deal with our environment. So basically, in terms of the heart, for example, I was there teaching Heart Math Institute actually to take their first EKG and how to spectrum analyze it. But what we essentially learned is that when the heart harmonics become inclusive, which literally they implode, the number of harmonics contained, when the number of harmonics in your heart is at a maximum, it's called harmonic inclusiveness. That's the way doctors measure whether you have an immune system. It's the fastest way to find out if you got an immune system, if your heart harmonics are inclusive, which means if your heart harmonics are varying a lot, then you're healthy. But if your heart rate is stuck, you're toast. Sorry, it's over. It ain't pretty, which means get off the damn couch. No, I mean, from there, I invented the concept of heart coherence. I'm credited in the literature with inventing the word heart coherence because, and I taught heart math, some of that. So basically, when you take a harmonic analysis called a spectrum analysis of an EKG, I discovered that if you're actually feeling love, you get this beautiful music in the harmonics. That was my discovery. And, there was related work commonly done in what's called heart rate variability, HRV, where you simply measure the interval in milliseconds between heartbeats. And you can get a lot. You can teach yoga breath and Kundalini and sacrocranial, measuring just HRV, just the pulse duration. But to actually measure this emotion in the heart, then you got to harmonically analyze the whole EKG. And that's our realheartcoherence.com. And we've been doing that for many years. Basically, what I discovered was if you take what's called a second order power spectra, which is a measure of the internal phase coherent of your EKG, of your heart, it's a peak that simply goes up and down and says if your heart has become a laser. It's really quite simple. If the internal phase coherence of your EKG, and this is why I'm credited with inventing the word heart coherence. So that it turns out that peak, simply going up and down of internal phase coherence in your heart EKG, That is a functional lie detector. I mean, it works as a lie detector. You can replace kinesiology. It's very cool. So, and the other thing is, if you're speaking your truth, up. If you're telling a lie, down. Your heart knows. And that's the discovery of this concept of a shareable wave and coherence. And what does that have to do with toroidal ether? So your heart is literally turning inside out recursively, imploding. The donuts are turning inside out recursively, embedding. We've got a lot of slides. And that implosion is how you become part of a shareable wave, perfected distribution, et cetera. So I carry on, but that's a little flavor.
No, I absolutely love it. I hope by the time this airs, I have just entered into a research project to measure the mitochondrial function with the practice of heart coherence and meditation. And I really think that, you know, those mitochondria are so sensitive. They're like little sensors to that flow, it seems like to me. So I hope by the time this comes out, we have some research showing that, because I am just a huge fan of heart coherence, a huge fan of your work. I really think that getting that in the public, at the dinner table, in every house is a game changer. It will really push the needle in the right direction. And we see that the needle is being actively pushed in the other direction, right? So I'm a huge fan of your work. And
And
I
just to say about the mitochondria, not to interrupt, but the mitochondria is famously fractal, the surface, the folded surface. And that's how they found Eve, the first woman. You know, where did it all start? They tracked the fractality of the mitochondria of Eve. And actually, it's the harmonic inclusiveness of the heart brain that makes that surface fold and be braided and fractal. Which, and you know, as even Bruce Lipton says, the memory in the brain, I mean, the membrane foldedness, the more folded, more fractal. And the opposite of that, if the membrane is not harmonic inclusive, in other words, if the cells turn into a sphere, that's how you measure when you got cancer. If the cell's a sphere, it's the measurement of the onset of cancer. In other words, you got to fold and fold the fold on the fold. And the way the harmonics in the membrane recursively braid and implode from the ambient love, I mean coherent emotion. Those phonons braid the membrane, and that's called membrane-mediated biology and structural stability and morphogenesis. So all that harmonic environment of good emotion is what's imploding your membranes and making them implosive and fractal and participate in the charge radiance of bliss.
right. And that ability to fold is that ability to, you know, join in that energy, in that conversation, right? And that cancerous cell that can't is just not in the conversation. It can't be in that flow of
Yeah,
energy
that
and
implosion.
information.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
that
this
implosion.
the slideshow that I prepared for today about, oh my God, if we can't teach our scientists the physics of what a soul is, our scientists in government, within a few years, we are going to have a soulless culture. And that's an
Yeah,
emergency that we must teach our scientists and our government the science of what it is to have a soul. That's the little slideshow that and you sense my enthusiasm. And that fits what we're talking about, because it's when the heart turns inside out recursively, implodes, and then you can measure those phonons, that long wave coherence. You can measure that cause the DNA to recursively braid implode. Glenn Ryan helped me make those measurements. And when the DNA recursively braid implodes, that compression effect, and it's all about compression, successful death, getting a soul, having bliss. It's about implosion preceding radiance. So, but in the presence of that compression, imploding in the glands, imploding in the braiding of DNA, what happens is the electromagnetics of the aura, literally the plasma of your spirit, your soul, convert what's called the transverse EMF at the implosion point, which is Planck. The definition, the only real definition of quantum healing is precisely this, that when that implosion happens, the braiding is tuned to Planck length and time, the musical key signature of every wave in physics, and powers of golden ratio times that equal fractality perfected. So the braiding and imploding squeezes down to Planck and squeezes out that toothpaste tube pine cone from the transverse down to coherent longitudinal EMF, which Bearden proved is the only physics of gravity waves. And that longitudinal EMF we can prove by measurement is the only physics of lucid dreaming and clairvoyance. In other words, do you take memory through death? In other words, do you have a soul? So if you're not spitting out that longitudinal coherence, the Ba from the Ka, the Kesjan, the rainbow light body, we get a lot of names. But when we can teach our physicists what it is to have a soul, then we ain't going to be doing this stuff that's stealing the souls from our kids, namely Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, electrosmog, 5G, metal buildings, and dead air. It's stealing the souls of our kids rapidly because our dumb physicists don't know what a soul is. So anyway, that's my 2 cents. That's what I prepared for today. Some pictures about that.
Well, I teared up because I am in complete agreement, and I sense the same urgency, right?
Urgency.
Yep, that same
It's urgent.
holographic thing. Yeah, it is. It's so urgent. So
Yep.
let's get to it.
Yeah.
Let's hear. Yeah.
Okay, so the pictures, I set up a few pictures. Can you enable screen sharing? Let's see here. I click
I sure
OK.
can.
I've got a little keynote cooked up here. Let's see here. Host disabled screen sharing. Oh, here we go. It's cooking. It's cooking. Good, good. And okay, keynote. This is a talk I gave in Tours, France with Elena Denon recently. And we're starting in the section. I've got notes here. I'm doing this. Have I prepared correctly? Yeah, so fractality. So basically, golden ratio is the solution to compression, and that is a solution to every problem in physics, urban design, computers, alchemy, immortality, getting it. It's all about solving the problem of compression. If you solve the problem of compression, you've solved every problem in physics, basically, especially how to get a soul. So that the wave mechanics that enables that compression, we start here. So on the right, on the bottom, and sorry, you can't see the numbers, but in the green wave on the bottom, that is the known Schumann harmonics, a golden ratio caduceus cascade. On the bottom, it starts with 7.83 hertz, 614, around 30 hertz. And the blue numbers on top are my equation named PlanckFire.com. You start with Planck, multiplied by golden ratio, and you get the fractal solution to everything, the charge collapse, which defines origin of gravity and origin of consciousness. PlanckFire.com, PlanckPhire, PlanckFire.com. So you take that equation, which is behind everything I talk about on every slide, and that's called charge collapse, which is conventionally, regular physicists know charge collapse causes gravity and consciousness and immortality, by the way. What they don't know is what causes charge collapse. And that's where we're going right now. So you take those frequencies and you map them on the brain waves at the moment of bliss. This is 5 harmonics in golden ratio at exactly that cascade. In my EEG, flameinmind.com, and I'm having a bit of Kundalini bliss. Now, in the advanced work, and we're not going to really do that here, but the talk there in Tours was about our friend Jean-Charles Moyen, that when he got extreme amplitude in those brainwaves frequencies, that was the moment just before he repeatedly teleported with witnesses, came back with sand between his toes. And basically what happened is that when you get enough compression, you can embed in that array. The beginning of that is lucid dreaming, which indicates if you have a soul and if you'll take memory through death. So this slide show is going to move toward the science of lucid dreaming. We call this lucid brain. You can read about it, flameinmind.com/lucid brain. So basically there's a stairway to heaven. The harmonics in the EEG here, green is alpha. The harmonics in blue are golden ratio. Harmonics in pink are octave. And octave and golden ratio together create this perfect star mother nest, which implodes in your brainwaves. Very more basically, we've been teaching kids to do this for, I don't know, 10 years. And what happens is when the kids make this brainwave signature here, flameinmind.com/outer vision, they repeatedly, as kids around the world, they can see without their eyes. But the thing that's really cool is this is very well known, but it's teachable because your brain implodes. The harmonics of your brain waves become like fingers on the liquid vortex of charged plasma inside your head named consciousness. And when that comes to a point, that's called perception. The cool thing is the squeezing of that vortex tornado to bring it to a point to create sharp perception is the harmonics of your EEG making this perfect pine cone squeeze. So the thing I was going to mention is the kids, when they start seeing without their eyes, it's very well known, they often, even and usually begin becoming clairvoyant and start seeing their ancestors. And this really freaks out. But the physics of that perception, seeing without ours, and specifically the physics of clairvoyance and ancestor memory and having a soul and seeing through death, all has to do with embedding in this longitudinal array. And that's what this whole slideshow is about. The longitudinal array is ancestor memory. And to get into that array, you got to do the squeezing. We have slides about how that happens during successful death, which is a black hole. It's a vortex that gets squeezed down that caduceus. And anyway, there's too many slides here. This is the harmonics of the brain. This is from Flame in Mind, brainwave harmonics, brainwave harmonics. And this is where actually, if you map on the surface of the head where the flame gets lit in brainwave onset, brainwave coherence. And so flameinmind.com is very powerful. And so this is where if you actually measure the wave shape of the pressure of the touch that says love in the measurements in the Cintiq literature, the physics of emotion, you see the point of max pressure during the duration of the wave of that emotion is reached at 0.618, tantrically delayed golden ratio, causing that implosion, turning inside out, et cetera. And so the love wave looks like it's literally imploding. Well, so it's embeddability, perfected fractality. And this is just, I'm going fast because I have to, but please interrupt me.
No, this is wonderful.
But so this, we've been teaching this for years because of flavor. So if you interview 1,000 people who just died, I mean, this is near-death experiencers. Heinrich Kluwe said, "What did you see?" And they said, "We saw a lattice, a cobweb, a tunnel, a spiral." Also some drug experiencers. So, and you know how you see your whole life in the second before you die? It's a compression effect. So what's the DNA doing just before death? It's recursively braid imploding to squeeze you into that pine cone of the longitudinal array. And if the squeezing is good, you can embed and enter the array. But if the squeezing ain't good, like you didn't implode well, for example, if you died in electrosmog in a messy hospital full of metal, or if you take a picture of death of people who died in the woods, you can see their soul leaving. Because anyway, so successful death is absolutely, the visions are contagious and they require implosive compression. So just to finish that thought, so now let's translate the ability to lucid dream equals the ability to take memory through death, and thus defines soul. So now let's look at the physics, and I do mean the electrical physics of lucid dreaming. And so here's the university research on the frequency harmonic cascade, which in university studies triggers lucid dreaming. And in a moment, we're going to compare that cascade to our Therify.net, where we see that's perfected cascade is how we drive Therify, that implosion. And as in the studies or the reports, we repeatedly trigger lucid dreaming because that's a compression field, an implosion field. So that's Tantra, that's the physics, and this is the mystical visions during the implosion. And here's what the Therify looks like. Many of you have seen. So there's a pine cone, a cascade of harmonics like this between the two plasma tubes. The Egyptians, actually, they called it Shem unto the Lord. And what they were doing was building an electric field to eliminate aging, the definition of Shem unto the Lord, which was mistranslated altar in the church. The altar in church was actually a capacitor which prevented aging. And the frequency signatures here, it's called the caduceus. The Medical Association needs a lesson on what their logo is for. And so here is the physics. So these are the frequencies Antoine Priory famously used in France to heal thousands of cancers, here 3, 10, 32, 80. And I discovered the principle behind Antoine Priory, which is Planckfire.com, Planck times golden ratio. And this is the perfected cascade. And this is the harmonics which we drive, the infrasound in the plasma of Therify. And by the way, has a dramatic effect on seed germination. So now I'm going to just stop the slideshow a bit. I've gone way too fast as usual. But you see, the principle is that the reason a seed germinates, the reason Stonehenge and most pyramids existed, main function was to trigger the germination of seeds. Why? Centripetal force is the reason seeds germinate, because it really sucks. I mean, if they can't suck in the first nutrient, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the beginning of this discussion. Now, the next pieces of the slideshow is showing how this happens, how this happens in Kundalini, and more about the graphics of longitudinal. And there's a final section about DNA. But perhaps you have questions or thoughts first.
Yes, I want to zoom out for people and talk about when you say implosion
Yep.
and sucking, and can we also tie that to light and biophotons and that energy? Can we just talk about that in sort of a big picture way? So we talk about that toroidal flow,
Yeah.
and as energy comes in, that's that implosion, that's that spiral ether energy compression. Those are all what we're talking about, right?
Yes. And we're saying that what's called the ether in physics is actually a superfluid really named charge. And the compression and rarefaction of that superfluid named charge is plus and minus charge. And the spectrum for that superfluid goes from infrasound to optical, et cetera, et cetera. So the nature of that unified field is absolutely a superfluid called charge. And most of that charge propagates in a what's called a plasma, which is simply a cloud of charge, which is 99.999% of the universe by definition. And so embedding in that bigger and bigger cloud of charge, and whether it's phonon from the sound or optical, it's just a cascade of the continuous spectrum. The point is to realize in that unified field, for example, if you still think gravity and electromagnetism is made of different stuff, you need to be hospitalized for schizophrenia. But also, uh, if you're a physicist, most physicists on this planet believe in the idea of soul, but most of those physicists also think the idea of soul is somehow separate from physics, and they need to be hospitalized for schizophrenia also. So,
Right.
when people think that your soul is made of something spiritual stuff and it's separate from my body, that's when they do horrible things to their body. It's terrible. So that's the schizophrenia we're here to fix. That understanding physics is the best way to understand soul. That's where we're going.
Yeah, absolutely. And I often refer to this frequency language, right? This frequency of sound, of light, EMF. But that's what you are calling charge. And maybe I should change my language to talk about
Well, it's
charge.
essentially that. So you have virtually infinite spectra. It's all tuned by Planck, length and time. Remember, when that charge rotates, that stores the inertia, the only definition and origin of mass. When that charge rotates, it has a period of rotation, and that spin rate is the only definition and origin of time. Space-time is not bent. The only thing that changes is the spin rate when you accelerate. So
Mhm.
once we understand that, then we can see that there's an infinite continuum of frequencies. But in the universe, all negentropic frequencies, hydrogen radii, the Schumann harmonics, your brainwave harmonics, Earth year, Venus year, galactic year, precessional year, all of these are golden ratio times Planck, named planckfire.com, because that's charge collapse and that centripetal implosion is the origin of all negentropy, all origin of all gravity and all consciousness. And what happens is that's all squeezed down precisely at the Planck threshold. And that's the musical key signature of every wave in the universe for a very specific reason. And may I just carry on for another minute? Okay. Look, physics knows that Planck is the same length and time for a million light years in all directions. Planck is the same. But have they asked the question why? They call it the Big Bang, but that's crap, actually. No, the reason is because when waves get squeezed down and tuned to Planck, the universe has agreed that the transverse inertia, the up and down motion of the wave, will be focused and translated in vorticity coherently to coherent longitudinal EMF, sometimes called scalar. And that compressional wave has a different, more efficient wave mechanics of propagation because it can pass through about anything, but it only stops or exchanges inertia at the nodes in a fractal array, dodecacosa, the only possible 3D fractal, the only geometry of hydrogen, DNA, Earth grid, zodiac, and the dominant geometry of all orbital mechanics. And actually, this is the only geometry of nuclear hadron nesting, and this is the only geometry of SPDF electron shells. It's only this, always. Why? Even Kepler knew. Because you nest the platonics accurately, this is our star of the kit, you get golden ratio, and that's charge collapse. So the reason Planck is the same around the universe is more than just this is the physics of all DNA radio. This is the physics of all action at a distance, coherent longitudinal interferometry. Now, these longitudinal waves, they bounce at these nodes, and guess what? Longitudinal wave interferometry, the longitudinal waves bouncing around, have the same problem as Gaza and Ukraine. If you don't agree, you're dead. In other words, if you don't get some kind of agreement, you're toast. It happens that the longitudinal waves all bounce at these nodes, and eventually only the shareable waves survived, the compressional waves bouncing in pure fractality of Planck at every wavelength for 1,000,000 light years in all directions. Because any other wave not tuned to that gets canceled out. That's why Planck is the same for the entire universe. So that then is an introduction to why children who are sensitive, they felt when 3,000 people died on 9/11, those children won't let their parents kill an animal to eat it because they can still feel something. Those children still have a soul, and that DNA radio is based on the longitudinal interferometry on Planck. That's why the Aboriginals call that ancestor memory, songline, dream track, their only definition for God. Just one sec, I got to turn something off here. 1 second.
Oh, no worries. No worries. I'm absolutely loving this. And it just is getting to the heart of what so many people talk about in boxes or in compartments, right? And you
Yeah.
bring back to this ever expanding, all inclusive, the universal field, that ocean of energy and existence. So I'm loving this. Please
So
go
the
on.
summary is that it takes compression to get into that array. It takes the discipline of compression. So if you're at a magnetic line cross point, Dodecikosa Earth grid, the only place you can have commercial level telepathy, the only place you get nuclear radioactive critical mass is reduced, by the way, at those compression points, like a cabin in the woods or a sacred site, your DNA can implode. Beautiful. But you put these kids in these steel and aluminum buildings with electrosmog and bad air, their DNA is never going to implode. And they don't get lucid dreaming. They don't get telepathy. They don't get remote viewing. And very fast, these kids are losing their soul because we can't teach our physicists what a soul is. And I'm mad.
We all should be, right? I
Yes.
mean, I'm a homeschooling mom, and I never thought I would be, but having kids completely changed my view. And yeah,
So you got
absolutely.
to
And
get those kids in nature. They need to have
yeah,
feet in the water, grounding. They got to feel the energy. It's like Luke Skywalker, man. He didn't
yeah,
raise the Jed in a city. No, hell no. He
yeah,
went deep, deep, deep into nature.
yeah,
Raising the
yeah.
Jed is the aura unpacking. Jedi, it's plasma projection.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And then on the flip side, when you look at elder care and these assisted living homes and the disconnection of nature, that whole cycle in our society, from our young to our old and everyone in between, they are not allowed this flow of charge, of frequency, of information.
Grounding, experience of bliss, which means our ancestors knew very well how to plan for the moment of conception, the moment of birth, the moment of death. Altar at Machu Picchu is going to work fine. A metal hospital, oh shit, no, because your aura cannot be distributed. You got how many dozen medical doctors, surgeons now have been documented having left their body during near-death experiences and described where they were looking at their body from outside their body. The medical doctors documented now, thanks to Ray Moody, he's wonderful. And so guess what? Not one of those medical doctors could look at their body from outside their body from inside a metal box. Hell no. If you got a metal box, your aura is trapped. And this means no lucid dreaming, no soul. It means whoever designed cities should apologize. So anyway, so we have this biologic architecture curriculum based on, we can measure whether a building will cause a seed or a child to grow. We take the harmonics of capacitance in the center of the building, determine its implosive, by measurement, predict, does that building make seeds and therefore children grow? And then we decide what architects get paychecks. And you know what? That concept is growing. Bioarchitects.net. Hello, we're going to dump this aluminum and steel crap because it's taking the souls of our kids. Anyway.
I love it. I love it.
So the opportunity to experience sacred sites, to experience compression, and the other part of this that we've been teaching about for many years is, I was inspired by the Aboriginals. I've talked about this many times. The Aboriginals were very clear. The definition of culture for them was, do you have the skill to teach your young people to have a bliss experience? If you have that skill, you have culture. If not, no, that's not culture. And so for them, the West has no culture. And they're right, really, because when you realize the physics of bliss, charge, radiance, implosion, is how you get an immune system, harmonic. It is how you get lucid dreaming. It is whether you take memory through death. It's how you get a soul. So hello, if you cannot teach your kids how to have bliss, you don't have culture.
Yeah.
No. And so then maybe we need to study what bliss is. Actually, so that's the next part of this little slideshow, but which is about how this works in DNA. But how are we doing so far? Does that make sense so far?
To me, most of it does.
We wanted to be gentle, but maybe I'm too Scorpio to be gentle. So the next part of this slideshow, 150, I'm moving in the slideshow, there's like 500 slides, but Thoth talk, one moment. Get it, tours talk. Okay, slide number 44. So slide number 154. I just wanted to show graphically, first about longitudinal waves in general. So here's more about how we measure the effect on seed germination from this implosion, whether it's plasma from Therify or the imploder.com. The seed germination effect is that centripetal force, obviously. So studying this, we want to get to this idea of how the longitudinal array, this nest, this web of fireflies, the center points of the nodes of longitudinal coherence, sacred sites, for example, how that creates collective unconscious ancestor memory, the communion of saints. And so we start with John Dee here, who was designing the pinhole camera of physics. Actually, this is from the Newport Tower design in Rhode Island by John Dee. But anyway, at the turning inside out point in the pinhole camera, John Dee called it scintillation. It's literally the twinkling point, and he was able to initiate ancestor phone calls using the twinkling point of the turning inside out point of light. And so there's perfect collapse at the point of that vortex, and some sorting happens. And the sorting that happens has to do with this vortex here, which we're about to get to. But first, in order to get there, we define and animate what a transverse wave is. So the move up and down movement is perpendicular to the direction of propagation, electromagnetic. And all of our radio, all of our communication uses transverse EMF.
Right.
Where sound waves are longitudinal on the bottom. This is longitudinal. This is sometimes called compressional wave, incorrectly called scalar. And here what you see is the wave of compression and rarefaction is parallel to the direction of propagation of the wave. For example, if you get a pair of these on opposing sides, you can cause a seed to grow. Or actually, the Trinity first nuclear bomb was called implosion for this reason. They could only use the longitudinal component to get critical mass. And critical mass has to do with the nature of human bliss too. Basically, you got to get the perfect squeeze, like a well-designed tomato juicer. And you can only get a symmetric opposing squeeze from the longitudinal component of these waves. So when you align these like this, you get what's called phase conjugation or implosion at center, because there's opposing compressional waves. The Aboriginals or the indigenous would call this the sacred four directions. In physics, this is called four-wave mixing in phase conjugate optics, laser physics. So basically, what's happening is when the transverse wave, which is all around us and most of our aura, enters a perfected vortex here, where these are the harmonics of golden ratio Planck fire, a perfected caduceus. So then the transverse wave goes down the throat of that vortex, and the legs, the harmonics of that vortex are golden ratio Planck fire. There's what's called optimized translation of vorticity, and the inertia that was transverse is spit out at the nose cone of the toothpaste tube of the pine cone kissing. What comes out is a longitudinal wave, a compressional wave. This was the Ba from the Ka. This was the Kesjan rainbow light body. At the Gurdjieff school, they said, have you made the coherent stuff of your Kesjan body? Because only that will make you immortal. Well, now electrical engineers can have the conversation. And so when that becomes coherent, you get what's called soul. Now, this is about Raymond Chow measuring golden ratio velocities faster than light, showing that this is the smoking gun, that golden ratio is the cause of gravity, because golden ratio harmonics faster than light are generally golden ratio times the speed of light. And also golden ratio is the dominant geometry of all orbital mechanics, a smoking gun that fractality stabilizes gravity and therefore all centripetal forces and therefore atmosphere. This is the famous book by Tom Bearden here, in which the equations prove coherent longitudinal interferometry is the only physics of all action at a distance and the only physics of gravity waves. So this is basically, and every spiritual story on the planet is about action at a distance. And the fact that Einstein called that spooky does not help.
Right. Right.
So this is called the raising of the Jed, based on plasma Jedi projective geometry. And this is from our Jedi school.science. We have a school for kids based on Jedi physics. And this is how the golden ratio happens in the pyramid. So the pyramids basically are called the Hummer because they take that phase conjugate pump wave, Schumann harmonic cascade, imploded down that perfected cone, and spit out longitudinal coherent interferometry at the center of the pyramid. And that's a pump wave which feeds an array around the planet called global wireless power. And Tesla did not get it right because he didn't have the frequencies right. He didn't know Planck fire, and he didn't know where the nodes were, the cross points. And so that's why Tesla never succeeded. And so some of these are in French too. And so this is, if you take that harmonic of golden ratio times Planck, you get the frequencies of Schumann on the left. Let me bigger picture. Frequencies of Schumann here, and you get the frequencies of the breath and the sacrocranial and the brainwave harmonics of Kundalini. So you take every column here in cycles per minute or hertz is simply, and the sacrocranial harmonics are all simply golden ratio times Planck. And that's the physics of Kundalini and bliss. For example, the equation Planck times golden ratio you have in red. The famously well-known tidal harmonics of the sacrocranial pump, the sacrocranial liquid, are in green. The only physics of Kundalini is if your spine liquid pump is working. This is up ledger in Florida proving if your spine liquid pump is functioning, it is clinically impossible to be depressed. So this wave then pumps up the spine, the sacrocranial implosion, and phase locks with the EG, and circulates the donut you were just talking about around the homunculus of the brain core, ignites the phonon coherence of the sound wave in the ventricle horns called getting horny. And that phase lock actually is the physics of bliss. Okay, so this is just the background of physics of bliss. And you can even prove this. We measured, these are the frequencies of the ringing in the ears heard by bliss meditators. And here's my equation from my teacher, Bentov, who wrote the book on the physics of Kundalini. And just to finish the thought, turning inside out recursively, we were just discussing, and here is the electrical measurement of the EKG at the moment of love. And this is the biophysics literature on what causes your heart to beat. And so this is the whole section on heart coherence. And we're not going to do that section right now. But basically, it is a spiral that turns inside out. There was a French version. Oh, we have English and French on that. But you see how non-destructive self-reentry, initiating compression, defines consciousness, literally implosion. So that was the second major section of the slideshow. And the third major section is on DNA. But how are we doing? Any comments, questions at that point?
No, I love how you bring it back to that idea. I think a lot of people are familiar with that toroidal flow of heart coherence. And so you are brilliant, and you take it out to all the points. And I love how you bring it back to people so that they can really grasp, oh, okay, it's that. I am familiar with that. I know what that means, So yeah, absolutely.
I just think it would be super fun if the 5-year-old kids who are asking the right question to their physics PhD parents, after they ask hey, Dad, why do objects fall to the ground? And the parents don't have a clue, of course. Then the next question from the 5-year-old should be, where does my heartbeat come from? And
Mhm.
it's been electrically measured. The voltage wave that converges on the heart is an imploding donut. That's Arthur T. Winfrey, When Time Breaks Down, The Origins of Cardiac Arrhythmia. So it is literally an imploding donut turning inside out. And then when she says, do you love me? And he says, well, I would turn myself inside out for you, darling. These are old jokes. Valerie would be bored with my old jokes. But since you haven't heard my old
Oh,
jokes,
it's
but so this is the implosion effect. In other words, once you understand, that's why I think when we go to our physicist to tell them what a soul is electrically, otherwise our planet is definitely going to be soulless within a matter of years, unless we can go to our physicists and tell them what a soul is. So please help me. But I think before we do that, we have to go to our physicists and tell them why objects fall to the ground. Einstein, Stephen Hawking's NASA, really clueless, unfortunately. And the thing is, the reason they don't know why objects fall to the ground is because they don't know the origin of any centripetal force. And that's why physics stupidly is still telling your children the universe is condemned to entropy, disorder. Well, hello, there's one path out of entropy called negentropy, the title of my second book, Origin of Biological Negentropy. And it is specifically that implosion because at that implosive centripetal point, self-organization is then possible. Remember, the first place physics ever measured negentropy in phase conjugate optics was lasers imploding. But if you take that to the golden ratio, you actually discover the origin of biological negentropy, the title of my second book. And so once you can then see the adding and multiplying recursively only allowed by golden ratio on that pine cone, perfected implosion, what adds and multiplies recursively constructively, the only wave mechanics solution to non-destructive compression, golden mean ratio, perfected fractality, means that the phase velocities, as well as the wavelength and wave speed, the phase velocities add and multiply recursively constructively. And that perfected fractality means that only that golden ratio geometry, fractal compression, turns compression into adding and multiplying phase velocities into acceleration towards center of charge, which is named the gravity. So when you learn what causes charge to acceleration towards center, suddenly you can think about, oh, now I know why objects fall to the ground. I can answer my 5-year-old. I think the PhDs should be pleased. And then once you know that, then you can figure out the origin of consciousness and the origin of soul only after you figure out what makes anything centripetal. Otherwise, it ain't good. And the thing that's so cool is, and that's what my book, Planckfire.com, Planck, Planckfire.com, proved by equation, is that conventional physicists already agree charge collapse causes gravity and consciousness. They just scratch their head, do not have a clue of the cause of charge collapse. And that's the question I've answered, Planckfire.com. You tune golden ratio times Planck, and you get the answer to their question, which is the cause of charge collapse, because they already knew the charge collapse causes consciousness and gravity. So that's kind of, anyway, the last section in the slideshow, or did you have a question at that point?
No, I'm just thinking of as a doctor, I go back to the breath and that
Yeah.
collapse and that cycle
Yes.
and
And actually,
heart coherence. And
the HRV harmonics in that red and green chart of the sacrocranial bone, that is the breath harmonics, exactly of how you teach Kundalini. That 0.1 hertz wave in the center called Mayer wave in that red and green chart we just showed is called the Mayer wave. Not only is that the most important frequency in the blood and in the body, 0.1 hertz, 10 seconds per cycle. That is the LF component, the biggest peak in the HRV, LFHF. And it is the most important frequency of the breath, 10 second, 5 seconds, which is the only thing heart coherence calls coherence. I mean, the Heart Math Institute, they call that coherence. Well, that was a start. But yes, that 10-second breath. So breathing in that cascade is absolutely your leverage on the Kundalini, exactly. And that's why we have breath tuners that are part of our HRV biofeedback, because that's exactly the control mechanism you have. So it's a beautiful insight, right?
And what you are talking about with the setup of cities and these steel buildings, that doesn't allow for the connection to that greater
Right.
toroidal force.
Doesn't
Yeah.
allow embedding, doesn't allow charge distribution. Charge distribution perfected, which is fractal, obviously, looks like a rose. Make a magnetic map of your bed, your house, and your village, and rearrange each to look like a rose, and then you're done. The magnetic map of Prague looks like a rose, and they got tourists and money because they're attractive. And the reason the magnetic map of Prague is literally a rose is because that was the caldera of a giant meteorite whose trace mineral made a rose out of the magnetics, actually, which is the
Wow.
origin of most of the study of alchemy on this planet, which is that implosion from the stones on the streets of Prague. But anyway, but so that's why our friend used to say, don't tell me who's sick in the house. He goes and makes a magnetic map of everybody's bed, and then he tells you who's sick. That was Gary Skillen. He was amazing. So in the last section of the slideshow I prepared, we're going to go fast through these things, but it was just since it was the story of the moment, was how this impacts DNA, how it works in DNA, this bliss ensoulment. So this is, when Kepler said the planetary orbitals make a nest of platonics, he was actually right. The planetary orbitals use golden ratio because charge collapse, when you make a nest of platonics, you make golden ratio. And that is the reason the atomic table is only and specifically a nest of platonic solids, SPDF, from the electrons to the nucleus, the physics of stargates. This was quite a slideshow, and we can't do the whole thing. And here's so you get your fingers on the vortex point, piezoelectric, with the harmonics in your EEG and your EKG, and you squeeze implode, and that makes gravity, and that implodes. All right, but so we're not going to do the whole thing. But on slide number 154, yeah, this was just that focused human attention causes electric fields to compress. And now we know why. And these are the physicists who already agreed that charge collapse causes consciousness and gravity. They already agreed. They just don't know what causes charge collapse. Oops, that's a detail. So that's the question we're answering by PlanckFire.com. So on slide number 154, we get the vortexes imploding. This is if you take that same Planck fire, you get the origin of sacred dimensions, because sacred dimension is only an introduction to charge collapse enabling. That's why it's called sacred. That's why the British foot is exactly golden ratio times Planck, recursive turning inside out. Okay, and this is Agnihotra only works at sunrise and sunset because that's when the longitudinal wave crosses and that's when the birds sing. It's very important. Okay, so slide number 154. I'm finally there. Here we go. So the recursive braiding in DNA, remember that the dodeca is the fourth spin of the cube, and the ratchet of the dodeca down a helix is the fifth dimension in the thread of DNA. And then you braid the braid of the braid on the braid, and you have 7 spins outside, 5 spins inside. So here's one rung in the ladder of DNA. Notice hydrogen at the center of the codon. I have written the new equation to prove how hydrogen is fractal at the center of the DNA rung codon zipper, where the lightning bolt goes through during bliss. And if you can survive lightning, Daniel Brinkley, you can take memory through death. And that's called 7 spins. Found 6 around 1, 7 spins outside and 5 spins inside. And so this was, well, I think there's an animation here. So most of you have seen this. So the thread is embedded in a string, which is embedded in a rope, which is embedded in a fat rope. And eventually that recursive braiding process implodes and the DNA actually becomes toroidal and the plot thickens. I mean, the braid thickens. And you see how lattice cobweb tunnel spiral, what you see at death is actually your DNA preparing to implode, because your DNA knows that it only gets immortal if it implodes into the longitudinal array, called taking your ghost through death. Your DNA knows, and if you're too dumb to know, then you're going to die in a metal box. But if you understand, then you're going to arrange a plan for successful death prepare by lucid dreaming, know where your sacred space is. And so this was the low frequency harmonics of the EKG, measurably increasing the braid coherence in DNA. Glenn Ryan did the measurement at my suggestion. So the braiding of DNA measurably is caused or phase locked to onset of heart coherence. That's the point. Love, as it were. So your DNA does that braid on the braid imploding. It gets thicker and thicker, and the long wave embeds on the short wave until eventually it becomes toroidal. And so this is the wave on the wave, waving, embedding, perfected. And this is how that shows up in the harmonics of your EKG and in the harmonics of your breath. So this is the definition of heart rate variability success, harmonic inclusiveness, as graphed by Irving Dardick, whom I work with in his book, Making Waves. And from 2D to 3D fractality, does the animation still play? I had a lovely animation here. Oh, there it goes. So from 2D fractality. And so that, and this is somebody else made this animation. I didn't make it, but it's beautiful. You see how the braid on the braid of the braid in the braid. So when people say, are you in the next dimension yet? What they mean is a number of axes of spin of charge superposed. And here's the actual photo micrograph of DNA in a donut called Lord of the Ring. And here's the phase angle of those donuts, origin of alphabets. And I'm supposed to stop at slide number 169. Oh, yeah. So we're not going to go to physics of origin of alphabets here, but you just get the idea that you index the spin of those toroidal domains, you get the physics of sacred alphabets. And most of you have seen these goldenmean.info/DNA ring. And that's the end of the prepared visuals for today's dance.
Absolutely incredible. And when you're talking about the codon and the hydrogen, I immediately start thinking about water and water as an information carrier and the hydrogen. And I mean, I could talk to you for days and days and weeks on weeks. I know Dr. Ryan was looking at scalar technology
Yeah, which
to
is longitudinal.
structure water.
Longitudinal, exactly. In fact,
Yes.
our new invention, piezofire.com, uses a pair of piezo oscillators for pain reduction due to implosion. But the new invention that's just coming out is going to be called Fire, PHR, firecrystal.com. You take the piezo oscillators and you trigger a phase conjugate quartz crystal, literally a Atlantean fire crystal. And it's already been shown if you do that correctly and point the output at water, amazing stories. I mean, it'll knock your socks off, healing people. So the reason water picks that up so well, even from Therify, is precisely, as you said, that hydrogen center bond is profoundly fractal and charge distributed. So when hydrogen is flowing in nature, it's some of the best DNA radio around. It is fabulous. But you trap that water in metal boxes and oh shit, it's bad news.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
because that's why the kids need to pee when they hear the river. Water looks for the perfected shareable wave. It's always wanting to go there.
Yeah. Absolutely. Same with that flow of energy. That's why we
Exactly.
need to get out there. Yeah. Oh
Embedding.
my goodness. Oh my goodness. This has been absolutely wonderful. Um, You are just to say you're an incredible wealth of information is just undercutting it. I am so grateful for your work and your continued work and passion from the bottom of my heart, Dan. Thank you so very much.
Well, that's wonderful. Yes. And to just review the core issue here then is if the young people get access to the sacred space, compression, nature, and bliss,
Mhm.
then that compression effect, the body begins to radiate this form of longitudinal coherence, which is measurably electrically the stuff of soul. In the aura, and that's our immortality. So we must be able to teach that. And so that's my life or death urge. Thank you for sharing that shareable wave.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I share that same passion for in the now with people who are sick, right? As you do. I mean, it's just incredible. So I just want to remind everybody, please go check out Dan's presenter page, the many links that he's talked about where his work can be found, where his products can be found. It's absolutely mind-blowing, and I hope you go down the rabbit hole and stay there like I have. Dan, again, thank you so very much for your time and generosity today sharing with us.
Nice meeting you, and I'm at your service. I sense pure intention.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you
Take
so
care.
much. Such a
Listen,
pleasure.
listen. Bye-bye. Bye.